Hello, 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 and welcome to the character profile re-upload for Eddie Yeats for YouTube. Hi.
Hi.
All right. How you doing?
I can't.
You can't do it, can you? We love Eddie Yeats on this podcast. He's bloody brilliant, isn't he?
Oh yeah, yes, definitely.
End of summary.
Thank you for joining us.
We'll be back next time. He was brilliant. This character profile we originally recorded for episode 88 of Conversation Street, so way back. And I had watched some of him then because I'd seen him on the Granada Plus repeats in the 90s. And I thought I probably quite liked him. But rewatching him again last year, he was like a shining star of the 70s and 80s Coronation Street, wasn't he?
He worked so well.
Absolutely
I don't
brilliant.
think we actually talk about this in this podcast because we hadn't really seen very much of him. I'd seen that episode, I think, of him with the bins, with them looking in the rubbish tip.
Yeah.
But the thing about him that worked so well was that he slotted into the Stan and Hilda dynamic perfectly. And normally when you have a double act like Stan and Hilda on Coronation Street or any show, you don't want to mess it up.
Yeah, don't add a third wheel.
But somehow they managed to introduce this new character, and he added even more. He just added
comedy added youth, vitality, comedy, and as we were watching through the 70s and 80s episodes, some of my favourite episodes were just the Eddie and Stan capers.
Yeah.
Whenever one came up, it's like, oh, brilliant! What's the latest harebrained scheme? What's the latest scam? What's the latest thing that he's brought from his mate in the tip that he's going to try and flog or get Stan involved in? He was so good. Geoffrey Hughes, what a fantastic actor. And we talk in this profile that's coming up in a minute about loving him as Onslow and keeping up appearances as well, and which was pretty much an Eddie Yeats kind of character, wasn't he? But he was so lovely and likeable and cheeky and just great. Really love him so much. And it's lovely how he got a happy ending in the end as well, wasn't it? Although Geoffrey himself didn't like having Eddie getting married off to Marion. No. She was so lovely and perfect for him, and it's like all the hardship that he'd gone through in his life, he ends up,
it's
off
like
into the sunset.
He had a little Becky ending, didn't he?
Yeah, he really did. He is brilliant, and I think I have to say, not necessarily remembered as fondly. I think people who know him go, yeah, he's great, but when you think who are the all-time Corrie greats, I don't think he's
gone down as a classic.
No, and I don't know why.
No, I
really
think, honestly,
don't.
I wonder whether it's just because his stuff in Keeping Up Appearances overshadowed.
Maybe it might be a part of the timing thing, because he wasn't like in the first decade. He kind of came in, what was it, mid-70s, left mid-80s. I don't know. No, I can't tell what it is.
Maybe he wasn't like. Was he liked at the time? I don't know.
He must have been.
Yeah.
But he does come across as a bit of a come in, has a bit of a cheeky time, and then goes off again.
Well,
he wasn't.
We didn't.
He wasn't
watch
like
every episode he was in. Maybe he was really tedious in the ones that we didn't see.
Maybe. I mean, he wasn't. He was a bit of a bit character, wasn't he? He
was kind of like a Norris or a or a Mary, where he
was involved in other people's storylines, comic relief. But he's so good. So we're going to play now the character profile, as I say, we recorded of him 7-8 years ago, where we said how good he was, but we've got a finer appreciation of him now. And if you want to hear more about how much we love Eddie, then just go and find some of our other videos, like the rundowns of the DVD episodes that we've seen, or the characters from the 70s that we enjoyed. He's awesome. Love him to bits.
Shall we do the profile?
Yes, here's our profile of Eddie Yeats. It's classic character profile time, and we've chosen to focus on Eddie Yeats this week, who had a bit of a dodgy past, and all the way through the time he was in Coronation Street, he was coming up with these kind of schemes and trying to get money, and he was in and out of prison, but he was still kind of very lovable. And from the classic Coronation Street episodes from the 80s that I saw, I think he was one of my favourites of kind of the comedy characters, because he was never like involved in the super serious storylines. He was just there as a comic relief, I guess, and he was played so well by Geoffrey Hughes, who's just like somebody that I don't think it's possible to dislike. He's just like an everyman kind of.
It's impossible.
As somebody who's not watched any of the old episodes, Gemma, how big a character is Eddie Yeats to you? Would you know anything about him apart from what he looks like?
Wouldn't even know what he looked like. Well, if it wasn't for the fact that I was on doing this podcast, I wouldn't have even known he was in Coronation Street, because the only thing I know about the guy Geoffrey Hughes is that he was in
Keeping Up Appearances and the Royal Family. No. You don't watch the Royal Family. No, well, I used to watch Keeping Up Appearances as well, obviously, where he played Onslow, which is a pretty similar kind of slobby, but very likeable character.
He has got charisma in bucket loads, that actor.
Yeah, and when I found out that he had also been in Coronation Street, I thought it was kind of funny. I was like, oh, Onslow is in Coronation Street. But yeah, I did enjoy watching it, but I don't know how well known he is for Coronation Street outside the core or old viewers.
Yeah, so what do you think of him then? Did you watch it when he was in it?
No, I didn't watch it when he was in it, but I watched the old classic episodes when he...
But you have seen
I have seen him in it, but this is after I've seen him on Keeping Up Appearances, and I thought he was great in it. So let's go back and do a bit of vital statistics for Eddie Yeats. He was born on the 22nd of August 1941. In 1983 he married Marion Willis, and that was part of his exit storyline, and he had a child, Dawn, the following year in 1984. He first appeared on the 23rd of December 1974 and made his last appearance on the 2nd of December 1987, although he had been out of the programme for quite a while before that. He just made a brief reappearance in 1987. All in all, he was in 511 episodes, which make him the 84th most featured character. So, I mean, compared to some other characters, he's still a fairly major character. He's still on that top 100 list, and as we have said, he was played very well by Geoffrey Hughes. Now, Geoffrey had first played another part in Coronation Street in 1967. He played Phil Ferguson, who was a thug apparently, before he started as Eddie in 1974. And as is often the case with these characters, he was due to be in it for just 3 episodes, but shortly afterwards he signed a 6-month contract. And he was kind of on again, off again for a few years, but from 1976, that was when he stayed full-time on the programme until 1983. So the background for Eddie was that he grew up in Liverpool, quite like Michael Rodwell as well, because there's Dennis's hails from Liverpool, Liverpudlian, Scouser. But yes, he reached adulthood with very few skills, so he couldn't find long-term work, which meant he turned to petty crime to earn a living. And in 1973, he was sentenced to 18 months in Walton Jail, and that was where he met fellow cellmate Jed Stone. Eddie came into it in 1974 when he'd been paroled, and he sought out Jed's former landlady, Minnie Coldwell, who he managed to talk into letting him a room for a bit. So he stayed in Coronation Street over Christmas, and ended up flirting with Bet in early 1975. Thought he'd have a chance with her. He told her a bit of a porky, saying that he was on leave from the army, but before long he ended up rearrested, and he was back in prison again. When he came out again later in 1975, he formed a window cleaning partnership with Stan Ogden. He lodged at number 9 with Len, Jerry and Ray for a bit. Was back in prison again later in the year after carrying out some burglaries with his friend Monkey Gibbons, which brilliant name. I can't even remember what this Gibbons bloke's actual name was. It's why do criminals always have silly names like that?
Why don't you ask one and see what they tell you?
Okay, I'll find one and ask.
Yeah. He stashed the loot in Minnie's house, which was naughty.
Yeah, Minnie didn't realise that it was stolen property, so I think she might have handed it in or something like that.
Whoopsie-doo. In 1976, Monkey and Eddie were released in July, but nobody wanted to let them stay with them.
No, because they were crims.
Because they were a bunch of crims. So they let themselves into number 11, and they were discovered by Elsie and Gail, and they had to plead with them to not ring the police and dob them in when they were found the next morning.
Yeah. Eddie made a very big impression on the street later that year, where he left a lasting legacy.
And us too.
Yes, it was. He was the one that gave Hilda her for her wall in number 13. And I think I watched a clip of this a few weeks ago, and I think Eddie was the one that called it a mural, and it wasn't necessarily from Hilda that it was the word mural rather than mural came from. Basically, he'd managed to get a load of cheap wallpaper for her, and then he was unrolling it, and the further he was getting down the roll, it was more and more faded, so they didn't have enough wallpaper to cover all of the rooms in number 13. So she sort of sent him off with a flea in his ear to try and find some extra wallpaper. He couldn't find a matching one, but what he did have was this alpine scene, and Hilda thought it was amazing. Annie Walker wasn't quite so impressed when she saw it, though. So, and then, of course, on that wall, on that mural, the flying ducks became very famous, and that's where we got our podcast logo from.
And it's all history.
Yeah, and he moved in with the Ogdens for a bit as well, because Hilda was so impressed with his interior decorating skills.
It was like an episode where he was playing Lawrence Llewellyn Bowen.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't too dissimilar from the sort of stuff they used to do in that
program. The hideous
programme.
thing they used to do in the changing rooms.
At least it didn't end up with zebra stripes as like around the dado rail. He tried to ingratiate himself with the local community by building a kids' playground at the community centre, but the parents were not very happy about the fact that he was an ex-con involved in the project. I don't think he'd even get his CRB clearance to do that these days.
No, I don't think so. So that didn't go very well, but he did get on really well living with the Ogdens, and he was a bit like the son they never had. Well, I mean, they had a son, but the Ogdens' children, we didn't get to see much of them.
A lot of people on Coronation Street prefer not to socialise with their own children.
Well, they had Trevor, their son,
Gail.
and they never really got on. And then there was these other children that Stan and Ogden apparently had before they appeared on the show, but Stan had apparently been taken away because Stan had beaten them up, and then they almost were like written into obscurity, and it was like these children never existed. But then there was always Trevor, but Eddie was much more of a son to them, and it was a bit like Tyrone being the perfect son for the Duckworths because of a dodgy Terry. But he still moved back in with Monkey Gibbons in November, so he didn't stay living with the Ogdens for too long. In 1977, in one of Eddie's get-rich-quick schemes, he sold Annie Walker a carpet with her initials on, and this is the scene that we saw when we went to the Corrie Fest last year, and they had those people acting it out there in the bar, and that was pretty funny because he had this. She thought that she was getting this monogrammed
bespoke
AW carpet, but it turned out that it was from the Alhambra Weatherfield's bingo hall, much to her fury when she found that out.
Doesn't like the idea of that at all.
No, I love the idea of these little mini storylines, or little. It's almost like Eddie's scheme of the week, or I can't imagine having things like that in Coronation Street these days. Because I almost think if it doesn't fit in with a long running storyline, you almost can't have it at the moment. Because I mean, you had the thing recently with Emily and her Breaking Bad, but that was just like
that's funny
off the cuff comment rather than something that was developed for a couple of episodes and then dropped again.
Yeah.
I mean, we always come up with our storyline titles, but how often is it that we come up with one and it's a storyline that's only for a week and then it's forgotten again? So that's a sign of gone times.
Oh well, it doesn't help that they're on 5 times a week, so you've got to keep people's interest somehow.
Yeah, I guess so.
In 1978, he was suspected of filling Stan's handcart with stolen lead. We had lead nicked off of our neighbour's roof, didn't we?
Oh, yeah, we did.
But it was actually his friend, Tiny Hargreaves, what did it. And he said, Stan said he didn't know Eddie. He claimed not to know him. But then they later shopped Tiny to the police, which was against Eddie's code, because although he was a criminal, he has standards.
Yeah,
you can't just go shopping willy-nilly people into the cops just because they did a crime.
Yeah.
That's no reason.
I guess that was part of Eddie's character development about his reforming into a proper member of society.
Yeah.
When he was dobbed his mate into the police.
In 1979, he started working for Len at the yard, but he gave his mate Herbie Cool access to Betty's house when he was insulating her roof, and Herbie ended up stealing one of Betty's clocks, and Eddie had to convince her not to tell the police.
Yeah, I think Eddie was usually quite good at being able to talk people round because, like you said, he was so charming.
Yeah, he had a bit of charisma to him, and just felt sorry for him, really. He's got this kind of like Eeyore kind of eyes, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, absolutely. And another funny little scheme later in that year, he sold a painting to Annie Walker that Hilda had painted, but he didn't tell Annie that it was Hilda's because Annie obviously would not buy something that her cleaner had painted. He said, it's by some upcoming artist. So that was kind of funny.
And she didn't stop to wonder why Eddie Yeats was the commissioned reseller.
Obviously not.
In 1980, he dated Lorna Ferguson, who was a respectable woman who soon moved with her family down south to the Midlands.
Yep. He also dated Pat Marshall that year, who was this punk single mother.
Shocking.
Yeah, but she ended up being more interested in chatting with Hilda than romancing Eddie.
How bizarre.
Yeah. He lost his job at the Builders Yard in 1980 when Len hired Martin Chevesky, and he ended up being a bin man. And I think if you look back and say what was Eddie's most well-known profession,
yeah, I knew he was a bin man.
Was it? And I think when Curly Watts came in as a bin man, he might have been one of Eddie's mates, if I remember rightly.
Well, it would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and that was the year that Hilda took Eddie in properly as a lodger because now he had a decent job, and actually bin men don't earn an insubstantial amount, do they?
Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with being a bin man.
It's not the most pleasant job to do, but you get paid for it.
Well, you'd hardly have to do anything. You don't have to go through rubbish, do you? Because they have you just basically wheel the bin to the back of the thing and it shakes it all out for you.
Who knows what goes on behind closed doors.
Well, being a bin man's nothing to be ashamed of.
No, definitely not. 1982, this was part of his exit storyline, really. He got to know Marion Willis over the CB radio, and I really remember watching this on Classic Coronation Street because it was just this nice little love story, this blossoming romance between Slim Jim, which was his CB radio name, and Stardust Lil. And I loved Marion from what little I remember of her. He claimed to be a businessman, not expecting that they'd ever meet, but when she showed up, he took Hilda's key to Mike Baldwin's flat because she was Mike Baldwin's cleaner as well, and he claimed it was his, so he was having to pretend that this was his. And then when Mike found out, he was quite decent actually and let Eddie have one more time there to kind of break it to her that actually he's just a bin man. But yeah, that didn't put her off. His honesty
forgave him.
Yeah, and
they got engaged.
There was a bit of on again, off again at the end of the year. Her ex turned up. She left him after he invested £1,000 in a dodgy car business when they should have been saving up for the wedding, but they were soon reunited by the end of the year. And then in 1983, Marion got pregnant and the wedding was brought forward. There was a bit of a clash with his mother-in-law, Winifred, but there was a quite nice moment in the wedding when Hilda stood in for his mother, and they had Curly as the best man.
And then they moved to Bury.
Yeah,
Bury.
Yeah, because Bury, I think, yeah.
And when they discover that Winifred has had a stroke.
Oh, sad. And yeah, and that was the end of Eddie, really. Then we found out in 1984 that this daughter was born called Dawn, but we didn't really hear very much more about them after that until in 1987. He made, I think, two episodes appearance. This was just after Jean Alexander had announced that she was going to leave and she was going to stop playing as Hilda, and Geoffrey Hughes wanted one last chance to act alongside her because I think they must have got on really well because everyone remembers the Oggies and Eddie together, and
yeah, and she wasn't going to get the chance to act alongside her and anything else. So.
Exactly. So well, although did they? Because I think he was on Heartbeat, and isn't she on Heartbeat as well?
I don't know.
I don't remember. I should have looked. But anyway, he wanted to have these last scenes, so she was in hospital, and he went and because she'd been mugged, and so he then went there and he was apologising for not staying in touch with her, but he told her to keep on smiling, and keep on tracking. That was the end that we saw of Eddie. He had left because he didn't really like the development of the Marion storyline because he always saw himself as a eternal bachelor kind of person. And he thought that the character would get boring if he settled down with a family. So
Yeah, he decided that the time was right for Eddie to leave. It's a bit sad, really. I think he would have been quite good, sort of staying on through the 80s.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen him in it.
Yeah, because like I said, from what I saw him, he was great. He was really kind-hearted. It was just like, one of these kind of dodgy geezers that got a heart of gold underneath, really. Like, I guess Les Battersby did in a way in the end, didn't he? I mean, Les was pretty vile to lots of people when he came into Coronation Street, but
yeah, he was a kind of all right guy at the end of it, wasn't he? I think.
Yeah. So yeah, that's Eddie. Good character. He also reminded me a bit of Graham. I thought Graham Proctor, because he came in as like, wasn't he an arsonist or something? Because he met David in prison, but we grew to love him. Eddie Windass was a bit of a dodgy bloke, but I thought he was good.
Yeah,
Becky as well.
Everybody, they sort of skirt on the edges, don't they? And you always understand why they're doing it. You don't begrudge them their little dalliances, because it's one of these sort of, they never really concentrate on the victims, or if they do, they normally end up making good with them. You know,
yeah.
Like how Becky didn't she steal from Hayley and then ended up being forgiven or apologising, and
Yeah, because and you get to find out about their past, and there's the reason for it.
There's always a reason.
Yeah, and I think sometimes pairing up these characters with well-loved existing characters,
that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, because you had the Becky with the Croppers, and you had Eddie Yeats with the Ogdens, and it's like, well, if they can forgive him, and if they can see the good in him, then we should be able to as well, I guess. What is it with Coronation Street and like cheeky, dodgy Scousers? It's they do live up to the stereotype a bit, don't they? Because you got Eddie Yeats, you had your Jed Stone was from Liverpool, Michael is Liverpudlian, and he's a bit from the wrong side of the tracks. Is there some kind of rivalry between Liverpool and well, Lloyd's is the one that doesn't fit because he's not sort of criminal anyway, particularly, is he? I don't even remember. There was an article on the Coronation Street blog in the past week or two about Liverpudlians and how dodgy they always seem to be whenever they appear on Coronation Street, apart from Lloyd. But I guess that's a bit of a stereotype.
Well, obviously there's always football stuff, isn't there?
Yeah.
But
I'm feeling, of course, the ultimate evil Liverpudlian at the moment.
Well, it says there's a Wikipedia entry on the Liverpool-Manchester rivalry.
Quick summary.
And it says
there is one.
Yeah, there is one. It's ignited after the construction of the Manchester Ship Canal. Oh. Blah blah. I don't know.
Well, maybe in Brookside they had some dodgy Mancunians in there.
Well, it says that they're still rivals now, but more recently, Manchester has openly and vociferously supported Liverpool in its recent bid to become the European capital of culture. Oh,
well, apart from on Coronation Street then, where they're still a bit dodgy.
Well, there's no way that they could ever top the rivalry between Portsmouth and Southampton, so don't even bother trying.
Yeah.
The only difference is we can't tell each other apart until we find out where we live.
Yeah, you haven't got the old accent thing.
No.
So that was Eddie Yeats, really great character. I'm sure lots of our listeners have got a lot more memories of him than I certainly do, and you don't know anything about him particularly.
I don't know anything. I've just listened to half an hour and I don't remember what we said.
Yes, you do. That was really informative stuff.
Something to do with Bin Man.
Well, it was enough for you to say, I wish that he could have stayed in it more find out. He was a nice bloke.
To be honest, that's based on his performance in Keeping Up Appearances, because I always loved him in that programme. I really loved him in that programme.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as we all know, unfortunately, the actor passed away not very long before we started.
Yeah, I think it was a few weeks before we started the podcast in 2012. He was only 68 as well.
Yeah, it was in July 2012 he died from prostate cancer.
Yeah.
So that was a big loss for the British
television acting.
Yeah.
I mean, Gemma and I hate the royal family.
Excuse me, I don't hate the royal family. I just never watched it.
Oh yeah, I'd not find it interesting whenever I watch it at Christmas.
Quite funny. I know you don't like Only Fools and Horses, so
no. But
just everyone's stunned in podcast land now. I can't believe it.
But yeah, he was a really popular actor, even if he wasn't in loads of things. And I think
I'd say he was a beloved actor.
Yeah.
He's one of those people. He's only had big roles in 3 things, but those 3 things were
iconic
cornerstones of the British television.
I think you're right. Actually, he's had 3 really big parts.
And I'm not going to go out and say anything ridiculous like he played completely different characters in all of them. He basically played the same person.
He played himself in the same way that Craig Charles plays himself as Lloyd, I think.
But they're so likeable.
Yeah.
That you cannot help but fall in love with
them. He lived round here as well. He lived on the Isle of Wight.
That's not really round here, but I appreciate it.
It is round here.
Was he born there?
Just across the city. I don't know where he was born. No, of course he wasn't. He was born in Liverpool, wasn't he?
Told you I wasn't listening.